in case you don't know me, my name is Valentin Despa. I'm a developer, tester, and also educator. I'm focusing mostly on explaining APIs and testing to people who are new in this industry, but also to more experienced testers or developers. I do workshops. I have a YouTube channel, which probably you know if you ever search for a Postman tutorial, just saying. And I also have online courses teaching different topics. I'm also interested in DevOps, so practically the entire development lifecycle. And I think these online conferences are a great thing. It's a pity that I don't have you in front of me, but I just have to imagine that there are a lot of people just watching this. So thank you very much for tuning in. The opportunity for everyone is that you can be in India, you can be in Europe, or you can be in the US or anywhere else and be watching this. The challenge is with these online conferences that you're in front of a computer and there's this natural tendency of like maybe checking your emails or doing other work in parallel. So because I care about this topic a lot, I just wanted to deliver the most important message right in the first 2 or 3 minutes of this session. And even the title of this talk should convey pretty well the main idea that I want to emphasize. And that is making sure your tests actually fail. So let me explain a bit, what I mean by that. And especially to answer this question, like, why is this important? And especially for you, why is this worth 30 minutes of your life in terms of watching this talk? And I'm going to start with this simple analogy. And I think a lot of people are in the situation where you're either in a lockdown or a shutdown or whatever you're calling it. And one of the things that we have to do is actually cook. And let's say that you're finished work for today and you have something on your stove and this has to cook for, let's say, 30 minutes or so. And you're going, hey, Alexa, set an alarm for 30 minutes. And Alexa says something like, I don't know, didn't hear you, or what did you say? And you're thinking, okay, I have an alarm, so I can rest now for 30 minutes because I'm tired. And essentially, this shouldn't be an issue because, you have a smoke detector. So if anything goes bad, you have this safety net, essentially. And let's imagine in this case, something goes bad. So, a fire starts. That fire typically generates some smoke. And what you would expect from your smoke detector is to, sound the alarm. And if this doesn't happen, it's essentially telling you, hey, continue sleeping, continue what you're doing, everything is fine. When in reality, it is not fine. It is far away from being fine. So essentially, we can say that the smoke detector is a test, is testing for smoke. And the purpose of any test is to sound the alarm. This is essentially the sole purpose that that particular test has. And if there's no alarm, you don't know about it. And then that is the point where problems can occur. And they can be minor problems where you can fix a bit later, or maybe your customers will complain and let you know that something is wrong with your API or with your software or whatever you're doing. But it would be nice to actually take advantage of the test that you have. So essentially, to answer the why in the beginning and why you should pay attention to this is just as the smoke detector that didn't sound the alarm when there was obviously smoke, the same goes for tests. They can be API tests, they can be unit tests, they can be any kind of test that you encounter. This is not just related to Postman, even though I'm going to talk about Postman in this session. So we can say that tests that don't fail, don't provide any value, are worthless. And you're probably thinking like, well, how often can this occur? This is something that probably happens to beginners, or, I don't believe you that this is even an issue. Why are we talking about this? This is ridiculous, okay? And, for a long time, I can say I was in your shoes, and I trusted like the technology and everything that's underneath, and relied on it to actually sound the alarm. But I also encountered situations when this didn't happen. Here's a very simple test. And this is written in Postman. And in all the examples that I have here, I've really simplified everything. I'm not really going a bit into like what was the response and what exactly was the assertion. So everything is not what you would encounter in real tests, but the essence of the test is still the same. So this is a test that has a small problem. And the problem is that 1 should never equal 2. But if we execute this test in Postman, the test will pass. So this is essentially the same thing as with a smoke alarm. It's not sounding the alarm. Postman is telling us here in this case that there's not a problem. There's no problem with this test. Everything is fine. So what is the problem here? Well, the problem is, going back to the basics, is that we are using here PM test. And PM test is a function that takes 2 arguments. Now we have provided the first argument, but as you can see, we're closing the function call here. I hope this is big enough for you to see. I try to make the screenshots as big as possible. But after that, we're defining a function. So if we were to rewrite this code, we have a test that is empty, doesn't contain any assertions. And after that, we're defining an anonymous function, which has an expectation inside it, but nobody's calling this function. So, syntactically, this test is correct. There's not a JavaScript issue with it. This is being properly picked up by Postman. It's just the way you have written it is not what it should be. So, it looks like a test, but it actually doesn't work like a test. During this conference, maybe you have missed a session, but the Postman engineering team announced a completely new feature inside Postman. And this is a shorthand syntax for writing tests. So you can, instead of writing these long expectations with to be something, PM.expect to be something, to be true, to equal something, you can use this shorter syntax. The problem with the shorter syntax is that the Postman engineering team didn't get a memo, and this was never implemented. So while this may look like a valid test, in reality, this is not. And as you can see here, just simply expecting true to be false written in this way is not actually working the way we expect it to work. So you can write anything you want using this syntax. In JavaScript, unfortunately, you can provide as many parameters as you want to a function. It will not complain even if it accepts only one parameter. So this is why these weird things are possible. And this is why the code itself is still valid JavaScript code, but it's not doing what we expect this test to do. Talking about this shorthand syntax that never existed, here are some other examples where this will not provide the result that you actually expect. In the first case, we're simply defining a test, and JavaScript will evaluate this expression, and this will be false. So essentially, our test name will be false. The same goes if you try inside PM.expect to evaluate an expression, it will only provide one parameter, but it will not make the test fail. And the same goes if you're thinking that if you return false from a test, that will fail the test. That won't do any good. So in all of these instances, the test itself will still fail, will still pass, sorry. But the intention of the expectation will be to fail the test. So these are all examples where you're not using the syntax that the way it is supposed to be used. You're inventing something that, as I said, the Postman engineering team hasn't figured out yet. And you're getting this unexpected results. I like to call this next example double trouble. And this is a test that is now getting more in the direction where you can see that it looks like a test that you may have in your API collection. And what's happening here is we have a simple GET request. We're getting back a very short response where it says here, first name, John. And then in the test itself, which by the way has the right syntax, so from a syntactical point of view, everything is as it's supposed to be. We're parsing the response. And after that, we're expecting that the property name from the response will equal some value that we have saved in an environment variable in Postman. So far, so good. Except there are a few issues with this. Now, as you can notice here, the property that we have in the response is called first name. And in the expectation here, we are calling the property name. So obviously, we got the wrong property name. So this test should fail, right? Well, not. If you're looking at the test results, you will see that the test will pass. So how is this possible if we have the right syntax? Well, it's possible because on this side here, with the environment variable, as you can notice here, there is no environment selected in Postman. So the environment that we're trying to use does not exist. Of course, you may be thinking, in Postman, I forgot to select it. It cannot happen if I'm using Newman. But trust me, I've seen many occasions where someone forgets to reference the environment, or the environment is not there where it's supposed to be, and essentially the value that you're getting here is undefined. The other problem is that this part is also undefined, because if you're trying to get a property that doesn't exist on an object, you will get undefined. The beautiful part here is that you have on one side undefined, you have undefined on the other side, and as you can guess, undefined equals undefined, and the test will pass. So this is why I'm calling this double trouble. There are two mistakes that happen at the same time that can lead to this test failing. Schema validation is one of my favorite horror topics. I've seen so many schemas that don't fail, that are either badly written or they simply cannot fail the way they exist or the way the test was written. I'm not going to get into this specific example here, but I've seen in a lot of places people wanting to get started with schema validation for various reasons. And let's say these reasons are totally legit. And they find themselves in a situation where they don't have a schema. So the advice is typically, well, copy your response, go to this website, paste it there. It will be automatically generated, come back to Postman, paste it in Postman in a variable, and everything will be great. Unfortunately, relying on a third-party website to generate your schema and to know something about your business conditions, what kind of data you're getting back in your response, how that data should be formatted, is really risky. And I've seen many people simply pasting a long schema in their test, not knowing what's inside, and particularly not testing if that schema actually works. It looks good, but essentially it doesn't provide any value. Just having a test that looks good but never fails is, from a maintenance point of view, great, because you have to never fix it. But from the value delivery, it's absolutely zero. This is another thing that I like. And looking at the test, it's pretty hard to tell like if there's anything wrong with it. And as everyone knows, the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42. And, to be honest, I photoshopped this because I wanted to believe that it's true. Unfortunately, Postman doesn't think this is true. And from a test perspective, indeed, it's not true. Still, the purpose of these examples is not to transform you into a computer that is looking at code and spotting mistakes. This is why we have computers, so that they can run code and point out any problems that they have. So don't worry too much if you haven't spotted any of the problems that I've been talking so far. I will talk in the second part of this talk approaches that we can take to mitigate it. But meanwhile, let's still take a look at other examples. I want you to get a bit out of Postman because this is not necessarily a Postman problem. And as you can see here, this is, let's say, a typical CI/CD pipeline where you have some stages, you're building your API, your application, whatever you're doing. You have some testing stages, and then maybe you're using Postman a bit later on where you already deployed your API to a system. So essentially, if you're doing CI/CD and you're using Newman for that, you're actually relying that if something goes wrong with your tests, that will be fixed. And that will be noticed in the CI/CD pipeline in case something is not okay. I like to use Newman, and Newman has this ability of being integrated in Node.js projects as an NPM dependency. So instead of running Newman run collection, you can use Newman as a library, and you can do advanced scripting with this. So essentially, you're extending a lot the possibilities that Newman already has. What I like to do a lot with this is either write files or go over any limitations that Postman and Newman have. And this is really, really powerful. The problem with this is, and I'm very sorry about this screenshot. I know it's not big enough, but I'm going to explain what's going on here. Right here on top, I'm using Node to execute my script. And as you can see here, there are some errors. So there are tests, there are Postman tests that have failed. But from a script perspective, the status code that the return code that was given back by this execution is 0. 0 means everything was fine. So this 0, everything was fine exit code means in a CI/CD pipeline that everything was fine, even though there were actually some errors that have been logged, but we're always looking at this overview. We're getting notifications by email. We have lamps that maybe go red. So if we don't see anything at this pipeline level, we assume that everything is fine, when again, it is not fine. Now, the reality is I haven't invented these examples that you have seen before. Okay, I have adapted them, but these are examples I've seen in the Postman community, I've seen in projects I've worked in, and in other places, students of mine that were trying to write Postman tests in workshops and so on. So really, I wish that we were in a situation where I had to invent this just for entertainment. But these are examples that not only beginners make, but also people that have a bit more experience with Postman. And some of them are really hard to catch. Still, we're at a conference and we want to learn new things and do some knowledge sharing. So I wanted to share from my experience in terms of hopefully how you can get over such issues. And I would really love if you can write in the chat if you ever encountered tests that never fail. I'm just interested for my own interested if there's anything like that, if I'm just the only one who has come across these issues. And meanwhile, I'm going to get into the topic of how to make sure that this doesn't happen. Especially if you're getting started with Postman, what I definitely recommend is using the code snippets. The code snippets are available anytime you're writing tests or any scripts, or you're in the pre-request script, and they're available here on the right-hand side. They're a small panel that you can pop out, and you can select from the list some of the tests that you can do. Typically, parsing the response and asserting a property, testing the status code, things like that. They're very useful, and they guarantee that the structure of the test and that the assertion that you're writing is the correct one. So especially in the beginning, instead of writing assertions from memory, it's better to look at the snippets and even at the Postman official documentation for some examples that definitely work. Now, just writing this code snippets or these tests either manually or automatically generated for somewhere doesn't really guarantee that there are no issues. And one way to quickly check if the test is actually working is to change something about it. Now, what you can do is either change the address itself so that, for example, if you're checking for a status to 100, you get a 404, and then you have a test that fails. Or an alternative would be that you change the test itself. I know it is not perfect, but still playing around a bit with the test, seeing that, okay, I added now 201, but it should be 200, that the test itself fails. So it's still a small step, but a very important step to signalizing what you have written is correct. The second part is starting with the test first. So anytime you have the opportunity to write the test, they can be API tests, but it can be any other kind of test before the code has been written. And this can be either an endpoint that is being extended or improved, or a completely new API, or just a new endpoint. You can go ahead and based on your initial understanding of the functionality of that endpoint, you can go ahead and write tests. You can go ahead and write a schema. And of course, everything will fail in the beginning. That's totally fine. But you can go through this pattern of having failed tests that you transform into green tests. So once they failed once, they guarantee that they work. So if every test that you have written is failing, every assertion that you have is failing, then when you bring the functionality and everything is passing, this is, in short, explained what test-driven development is all about. Another, let's say, a bit hidden tool in Postman are the mock servers. And generally using API mocks, either if you can use Postman or you can use any other tools that you wish. One good usage for this is not just to mock an API or an existing API or a future API, but also to create, let's say, a copy of an existing API that you're testing and playing around with it. So you can easily go to any request that you have, simply click on Save Response, generate a mock server, and essentially if you're already using environments or variables, you can simply change the base URL to match your created mock server. And inside your mock, you can totally change how the response looks like. You can change the status code. You can change the headers. You can change the body. You can decide if it returns JSON or HTML. And the benefit of this is that you don't have to modify the tests. You can just modify, like you would modify the API itself, but because it is a mock, it gives you this flexibility without actually changing code, without causing any issues in production, and so on. So it's a very safe way of ensuring that the tests that you have actually fail and allows you to simulate that the tests that you have actually work and fail when they're supposed to fail. Another approach that I would consider, and this is definitely nothing that you would do like every day, but from time to time, I would definitely look into introducing errors on purpose. And This really depends on the conditions where your software is being developed and if you have the permission to do this, but you can always pair with someone else. The main idea would be to look at CI/CD pipelines that you have and to figure out if there are any places where you haven't seen like ever something failing. This would be like a first indication that let's test that that respective job can actually fail. And you can think about what would make that particular part of my pipeline fail. And you can identify a situation in your code where that would fail, where you can introduce an error or introduce a behavior that is different than what's expected, and essentially commit this change and let the automation do the job. So essentially, at the end, at one part of your pipeline, you should see a test, or you should see a stage or a job, something that has failed. And ideally, when something that has failed, you should also find reports that allow you to identify what has failed, where has failed, and can lead you to the root cause of that failure relatively easy. So this would be the general idea of like testing the tests, but having this overall picture. So not just testing a single part of your test, just being in Postman. You're actually interested that in the end, if something happens, if someone introduces a breaking change, that change will be caught. Now, finally, and this goes out to the Postman engineering team, which, by the way, is doing an amazing job. And I've seen so many improvements in Postman, and I'm really, really proud of everything that Postman is doing. And yeah, maybe they are not here on the stage, to put it like that, and to get the credits and all the benefits. But I'm personally grateful for your work. I have here a suggestion in terms of like making Postman better. And one suggestion would be, how about when we have a test that doesn't have any assertions, to make that test fail, just on a basis that we shouldn't have tests that don't have assertions. And maybe this can help a few beginners out there be aware that their tests are not doing what they're supposed to do. And the assertion can be simply, hey, you'll have a test, but we couldn't find any assertions. So that was my talk. I hope it was useful. And just as always, reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and wherever else you can find me. I love interacting with you, and let me check for some questions to see if there's anything, or if you have pre-selected anything, I would love to hear that.
I actually, unfortunately, have to run, but Valentin, it does look like there are some questions in the Q&A tab. So if you have a few minutes, I'm sure the attendees would love it if you could answer a few of those. And thank you so much. The presentation was really awesome. I'll make sure our engineering team gets some suggestions from you. I'm sure they'll be very happy to have the input. They always are.
Thank you very much. And go ahead. I'll stick around to answer a few questions.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. So let's take a look at some of your questions, and I really appreciate you participating. What is a good validator to use for schema validation? By default, Postman has this tiny validator. This is one of the validators that you get when you're using the snippets. I don't really recommend that one, particularly because it's not really helping you when something fails. It's not really indicating which part of your schema is not okay. There's this newer validator. It's called the AGV, Advanced JSON Schema Validator or something. It's much better. If you look into the Postman documentation, you should find references to that one. Let me look at another question. So you can fail a test manually based on a condition. If I recall correctly, and I'm not using this too often, I think it is PM test.fail or test.fail, there is something with fail that allows you to fail. So for example, you have if a condition happened, fail the test, but that will not actually stop the execution of the collection or the execution of the rest of the tests if this is something you're looking for. What's the website for generating schema? You can just Google for any schema generation websites. I don't recommend that approach because you are decoupled from creating the schema. So either the schema has already been auto-generated from the code itself, which is the best source for generating that schema, and many programming languages, many frameworks do that. Otherwise, I would not rely on a third-party website to generate schemas. That's almost never a good idea. The reason for that is that you don't know your schema. And if something fails, you don't know exactly how to fix it. So I would rather invest, say, 1 hour, like understanding the basics of schema validation and manually going through the process of writing your first schemas, even for simple responses, using the approaches with mocks that I've demonstrated, and failing that schema, learning something new, understanding why it doesn't fail. So if you invest more in learning and understanding schema, you will benefit on the long run. If you're just relying on some third-party tools to fail your tests, I wouldn't do it. Unfortunately, in Postman, so the question is, can you create your own code snippets and share them with a team? Unfortunately, in Postman, it's not possible to have custom snippets. And you cannot even customize your own snippets. So, that's probably one of the directions where you have to go directly to Postman and to the GitHub issue tracker and see if there are like any suggestions out there. I think that would be very valuable to have either custom code snippets or to be able to share code snippets in somewhere within Postman, share with other people. Generally speaking, like this code sharing issue is one of the limitations that Postman has. And yeah, I guess, as a community, we have to raise awareness over the features that are really important and that will make our life easier. One final question regarding, can we compare SQL query output with response field values? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but typically I see API tests at a level where you don't want to know anything about SQL. So if you need to do any testing, do it in a way that you're interacting with the same API without knowing what's happening behind the scenes. Sorry. All right. If there are any other questions, Hopin has this messaging functionality, so you can directly message me. You can also reach out on LinkedIn, on Twitter. You can go to my website. You will find there a contact form if you just want to send me a message. So I'm available. I also have a YouTube channel where I'm posting a lot of Postman tutorials, actually. I would really appreciate if you can take a look at that. A lot of people have found the tutorials useful for getting started, but also like more advanced topics. It has been great interacting with you. Thank you for attending this. And yeah, hope to see you next time at another Postman conference. Have a good one. Bye-bye.